There's major news in the world of college football. The Big Ten has announced its new television deal, and this deal will have ramifications all across college football with expansion, realignment, and the way that we consume games on a weekly basis. I'm Stephen Lassen of All CFB 365. We're going to dive into this deal and look at what might be coming for college football as a result of the Big Ten's new television deal. Please be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and check us out on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at All CFB 365. Before we take a look at some of the ramifications going forward for this television deal on college football, let's take a quick look at some of the specifics, because this will change the way we watch games on Saturday. It's slated to begin in 2023. It's also a 7-year deal that expires after the 2029 football season. That's a key year to keep in mind. We're going to come back to that later in this video. The deal itself will bring in around $8 billion throughout the lifetime of the deal. It is the most lucrative deal signed in college sports in terms of broadcast rights. Going forward, the Big Ten will not have games on ESPN. It is going with an NFL-like structure in terms of broadcasting. Really no surprise, Commissioner Kevin Warren came from the NFL to the Big Ten. On Saturday, Fox will have its noon game, followed by CBS at 3:30, and then NBC joins the mix as a primetime game. So NBC back in college football with Notre Dame and the Big Ten, a big get for NBC going forward. So no ESPN, Fox, CBS, and NBC will be the main right holders. Of course, the Big Ten will have games on FS1 and the Big Ten Network. Now that the Big Ten has announced its television deal, there's a looming question for the league, and that is potential expansion. A Big Ten source told Sports Illustrated's Pat Forty, quote, "We are not done expanding," end of quote. Keep in mind, the Big Ten has already added 2 teams in USC and UCLA this offseason, so judging by the reporting after the Big Ten's television deal, it is apparent that the conference may not be done expanding. When potential expansion could happen, it could be at any point in the future, so it may not be imminent for the Big Ten. But if we look down the road, there's no doubt about it that Notre Dame is the number 1 candidate in Big Ten expansion. They've been the number 1 candidate, of course, for a while, so if Notre Dame wants to join the Big Ten, there's pretty much an open invitation. But if the Big Ten can't get Notre Dame, which seems very unlikely at this point, the obvious candidates come out west. That is Cal, Oregon, Washington, and Stanford. Those 4 teams have been rumored to be interested in the Big Ten. The Big Ten also perhaps has some mutual interest as well. There's an obvious reason to add these teams. Number 1, you give USC and UCLA some partners on the West Coast, makes scheduling a little bit easier, and also there's the potential for a lucrative 4th television window if the Big Ten could schedule late games every week. So I think the takeaway from the television deal announcement is this: the Big Ten is not done at all with expansion. It could come at really any moment. It could come a couple years down the road. They will make a run, of course, at Notre Dame, but if they don't, looking out west seems to be the most likely option. The bottom line is this: just because the Big Ten has announced its television deal doesn't mean that it's set on 16-team membership. We are going to have to watch this story close over the next couple months and into the next couple years. The news of the Big Ten's television deal will certainly have a huge impact on the Pac-12. Keep in mind, the Pac-12 has been in negotiations with television networks for its new television deal after USC and UCLA left in sort of an exclusive window with ESPN and Fox. The biggest thing for the Pac-12 is the Big Ten's deal sets the market. The Pac-12 now knows who can bid on rights and where it needs to go looking for revenue. The problem for the Pac-12 is going to be this: with the Big Ten leaving the door open for potential expansion, it's adding a layer of uncertainty into the league. With all of the uncertainty surrounding the Pac-12, The best case scenario for the league is probably a short-term deal, maybe 5 to 7 years, to sort of keep this league together at this point. Of course, a lot of this will hinge on whatever happens with the Big Ten. If the Big Ten in 2 years wants to get Oregon and Washington, Stanford and Cal, it can do it at any point. So the Pac-12 is really the conference with the most uncertainty right now. If the Pac-12 can keep together the 10 teams that are currently in the league, there's a question about potential expansion. San Diego State makes a ton of sense as the number 11 team. Of course, this is provided that the Pac-12 can't get any teams from the Big 12, which seems very unlikely at this point. And beyond San Diego State, to get to 12, the conference probably needs to look at Boise State, UNLV, or Fresno State as potential candidates. But the takeaway from the Big Ten's television deal for the Pac-12 is this: they know the market now. However, the ongoing uncertainty and future Big Ten expansion add another layer of chaos and uncertainty into the future of the Pac-12. It's no secret that the Big 12 has been going after Pac-12 teams in expansion this offseason, and there's no doubt about it that with the ongoing uncertainty with the Big 10 future expansion and the future membership of the Pac-12, the Big 12 can really push the envelope and try to strike on that uncertainty and add some of those teams from the Pac-12. This is Arizona, Arizona State, Colorado, and Utah. The ongoing uncertainty could help the Big 12 here. The Big 12's television rights are up in 2024, which is after the Pac-12. So the Big 12 is trying to position itself down the road for television agreements and the most lucrative deal possible. Keep in mind that if the Big 12 would be able to pull away some of those Pac-12 teams, it could add even more late night windows viewing for the Big 12, which could be very valuable from a viewership perspective and television right revenue for the Big 12. So I think the takeaway for the Big 12 is this: it has made overtures all offseason to Pac-12 teams. That will certainly continue. And if there are more defections from the Pac-12 to the Big 10, the Big 12 is in the conference that's best positioned to benefit, as it could add teams and continue to build into a 16-team conference. Last year, the SEC announced a huge television deal with ESPN and ABC. This television deal will be behind the Big Ten in revenue after the Big Ten officially starts in 2023. However, there's really not much of a concern in SEC country. There's really not a need to expand at this point. If the Big Ten grows beyond 16 teams, perhaps the SEC would look at expansion then, and this would probably be teams from the ACC, but that's far down the road. Keep in mind that Oklahoma and Texas are slated to join the league in 2025. If the SEC wants to look at ways to increase revenue and keep pace with the Big Ten, one of those could be going to 9 conference games. This has been a source of debate in the league this offseason, really ever since Oklahoma and Texas joined. Keeping at 8 or going to 9 conference games could be more lucrative for the SEC going forward, and certainly something that the conference would have to look at going forward. So I think the takeaway for the SEC and the Big Ten's television deal is this: the SEC will continue to be patient and strike when it needs to. At this point, the conference has a great television deal slated to start in 2024. That debate with 8 versus 9 conference games will continue. I think 9 conference games is the way to go, but I think the SEC will continue to be patient and just monitor the landscape, because there's no need to add any teams at this point. We mentioned the 2030s early in this video, and we're going to come back to that now because this is a key period of time to watch in college football. We mentioned also that the Big Ten may not be done expanding, but what if the Big Ten is looking south instead of west? Keep in mind that 2030 window, because that is when the ACC's grant of rights expires after the 2036 season. So if you're the Big Ten, a short television deal gets you to the 2030 window. You can evaluate the landscape then, evaluate that grant of rights from the ACC. Teams like North Carolina, Georgia Tech, Virginia, Miami could all be of interest for the Big Ten in future expansion. The ACC has been in search of additional revenue all offseason. They are falling behind the Big Ten and SEC, so finding ways to close that gap is going to be important for the ACC as it looks to remain a viable conference. So I think the takeaway from the Big Ten television deal for the ACC is this: a lot of growing concern about the revenue gap between the Big Ten, SEC, and ACC. And also, if you're the ACC, you continue to be concerned about the future of the conference unless you can solve some of those revenue concerns. Notre Dame joining the ACC would solve a lot of it, but I think that's very unlikely at this point. And finally, let's take an overall look at what the Big Ten's television deal means for college football. I think the first thing that jumps out to us is live sports are still extremely lucrative. $8 billion for a 7-year deal. Of course, the Big Ten and SEC are college football's best conferences. That rivalry between the two leagues will continue as both just continue to search for the most revenue, and the rest of college football continues to consolidate around these two conferences. So I think going forward for college football, and certainly great news if the Pac12 and Big 12 can stick together, there's a lot of interest and a lot of money still available in live sports. But also, I think the other takeaway in this is there's going to be more change. There's going to be more chaos in college football. The Big Ten leaving the door open to expansion. Whatever happens with the Pac-12, you have the 2030s and the looming grant of rights concerns for the ACC. So I think the takeaway from all this is, while there's stability and a lot of money in the Big Ten and the SEC, I think the rest of college football is in this space of chaos and change, and I think that's only going to continue into the future, not to mention the other issues in college football right now, the uncertainty surrounding the playoff format, the transfer portal, NIL. So I guess the takeaway from all this is expect the change in conference membership to continue well into the 2030s. There's no doubt about it, the Big Ten's television deal is significant and will have ramifications all across college football. We've broken down some of the things that we think are going to be looming for the sport in the near future. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Leave us a comment maybe about what you think is going to happen in the future for college football, what you think is going to happen for the Big Ten, the Pac-12, and the Big 12. I'm Stephen Lassen of All CFB 365. Please be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and check us out at Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram at All CFB 365.